The Enso Project. This is a podcast for people engaging in the never-ending process of expansion and growth. So the purpose of this podcast is to expand and grow through awareness, introspection, and stillness. We fundamentally understand that relative to all there is to know, we know relatively nothing. So with this in mind, we will consider and reconsider interesting perspectives, ideologies, and strategies for the purpose of self-actualization. Josiah, what's up, man?
Not much, man. Just here to talk about entitlement.
Entitlement.
Yeah.
What a fascinating concept.
Yeah, it is.
Any groups that you know of that are like associated with entitlement, especially?
Millennials.
Millennials?
From what I hear.
What?
Yeah.
This is upsetting. I feel like that shouldn't be allowed.
It's a entitled response. Possibly.
No, it definitely is, by design. But yeah, it's no secret that millennials are widely known as the most entitled generation, and Josiah and I, being millennials ourselves, just want to nip that in the bud and say, perhaps we are from this generation, perhaps and very likely we have our own entitlements, right, that maybe we're oblivious to, maybe we're aware of, but that's all beside the point, because we are not claiming to be experts on this subject, just like we're not claiming to be experts on any subject that we cover. Yeah. We're just having friendly conversation about it. Yeah. No big deal. No pressure.
No big deal.
So anyways, would you like to provide us with a definition of this concept, entitlement?
Yeah. So I'm going to use a definition or concept from a book that I really like, Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow, where he talks about entitlement, and it's referred to in a theory that he came up with some colleagues. That's called the fairness as a constraint of profit seeking theory. So that's kind of
profit seeking.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's all around fairness, but basically, let me scroll down because this thing is very long. Yeah, so basically the way I remember it is that he's discussing how when there are entitlements in an environment, particularly with labor markets and consumer markets, there are norms that are basically, they push the entitlement threshold, right? And fairness norms can explain why employers might avoid cutting wages during economic downturns. In consumer markets. Firms with some monopoly power might refrain from raising prices excessively to maintain a fair reputation, right? So he just kind of basically talks about how as consumers, as laborers, how whenever fairness is at play, sometimes entitlements are respected, or sometimes they're maybe disrespected or not adhered to.
Yeah.
And because we have been through several economic downturns as millennials, I think this is especially applicable to our life.
Makes me think of when you're framing it through economic downturns and things like that. It makes me think of some of the courageous pioneering employers who are offering lifetime employment, which I think it kind of makes me giggle. On one hand, it like inspires me and also seems totally impractical, because it's trying to create certainty, and we know that certainty is a bit of an illusion. We can have high degree of clarity, but certainty is it just assumes that we know too much, right? It's at odds with the essence of this podcast.
Yeah.
So I think it's kind of funny, but I love the idea that as a business, as long as we're around, if we've hired you, we brought you onto the team, you will always have a place here. You're never going to get fired because of external factors or conditions.
How does that actually work on someone?
Like, what's the impact to the employee?
Well, basically, how does someone see that or hear that
Mhm.
and then think to themselves, man, that's a great idea. I want to work in one place forever.
Right. It could be inherently limiting. Depends on how you view it. There are, I think, as a result of so much economic instability, right? It's this cycle that just keeps going through the motions. There are a lot of job seekers that I work with that, their number one priority is security, safety, security, stability, whatever you want to call it. They want to know that they are covered, and that as long as they hold up their end of the bargain, they do X, they're going to get Y, and that is the relationship that they're really seeking right now. But from somebody like us, our perspective, it might feel stifling to only be in one organization for our entire career, just from a perspective of like, there's only so much that can be learned in one environment, whereas if you have exposure to a wide array of environments, obviously the potential for learning there is immense. Now, I want to also add the little caveat here that I think there's an interesting paradox, at least this has been present in my life, where there's a quote from one of my favorite books I've referenced like a million times, but The Alchemist, that says, you could learn everything you need to know about life from a single grain of sand. This is when the alchemist is mentoring this young boy, and he's saying, if you were in a laboratory, then that would be the proper way to study alchemy. But you're not. You're in a desert. So immerse yourself. Learn everything that there is for you to learn from this experience. And by the way, the desert is the best teacher of all. And I love that. I think it's so true. If we pay attention, if we can become centered and grounded enough to be keen observers of our environment, the same lessons that we might learn elsewhere can also be found in a single environment. But I would definitely prefer to have many different environments and to learn a lot and be able to draw on those experiences, right? So that they're not kind of all filed under the same the same letters, the same concept, but that I can pull this experience from my time in the time I got to go visit Tokyo. And I learned all these I saw this different way of being and thinking and doing. I saw that the streets were so clean in Tokyo compared to New York City. There's trash everywhere, and it's like garbage cans everywhere, and it smells terrible. Yeah. That was a
Sorry, New York.
Totally new. Right. We love you, New York. You're great. It's just there is a lot of trash everywhere. It's a bit smelly. So, anyways.
No, I hear what you're saying. It's interesting to me that would actually be appealing to a millennial, just because I think there's a fair amount of research out there that suggests that millennials like to bounce around.
Yes.
And so I wonder if that was created by a company that was owned by a millennial.
It probably was.
Because of their hardship.
Yeah.
Right, growing up. And, I think also about, what you were saying, how you like to be in different conditions where you can begin to grow and adapt and learn and, really work through some things. I think entitlements sometimes prevent us from seeing the opportunity, because we're so disgruntled about
how things should be.
They didn't work out the way that our entitlement suggests that it should be that way, and so we don't really see the opportunity, and that's unfortunate. To me, that's one of the unfortunate.
It's a tragedy.
Yeah,
really.
Things about the concept, because if I spend so much time being upset or being disgruntled about the lack of fairness as a laborer, or a customer or consumer, then maybe it leads me to create a product. But because I spent so much time being disgruntled, are resentful or whatever it is, not getting over something and getting to clarity, maybe I've missed my opportunity to bring it to market.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Because it's just wasted time.
It is.
Right. The pain we experience from something not living up to our expectation of how it should be, it doesn't change anything.
It doesn't change anything.
But it does pain us greatly. I was going to ask you if you think that entitlement can exist without expectation. It kind of strikes me as though entitlement may be a function of expectation. I'm kind of curious to hear your thoughts on that. Happy to expand a little bit more on what I mean, if you'd like.
I definitely think it can exist without expectation. But I think there's a certain amount of awareness that it takes. So
to be entitled?
To be aware that there are entitlements. Now there's a mindset of being entitled.
Right.
But there's a whole nother it's completely different from actually realizing that there are entitlements that a particular environment or you as a participant or initiate of are granted, right?
I'd love to hear more about that because I think I gravitate towards the point of view that there is no such thing as entitlement, that there's only our perception of being entitled to something, someone, some way, some kind of state or condition, but that we intrinsically, inherently can't actually be entitled, that's just our frame of reference.
No, I agree. So you're a millennial, I'm a millennial. Well, we are entitled to Social Security benefits. I do not expect for them to be there.
Right. So what's the
age.
use of us having that frame of reference that we're entitled to it?
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't really make a case for it in my mind.
Well, I think the use is, I think it helps us, it distracts us from mortality, our time, our atrophy, our, the fact that we're living while we're dying, right?
Right.
We're degrading in terms of our biological makeup, right? Or transforming. And I think when I look at entitlements, or when I look at that expectation, it gives us something to look forward to.
Interesting.
In a way, that's at least that's the way I see it. We either live in hope or fear, sometimes both, and that basically takes us out of the present moment.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
That's
Was it
exactly
Seneca that
the
said
function.
that? Yeah, the hope and fear are the same. They both remove you from the present moment and limit your ability to adapt
Via distraction.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's what I think entitlements and expectations kind of do for us. Is it kind of takes us out of the moment, and it limits our ability to adapt. Meaning, we can't see the opportunity because we're so concerned with what should be or what didn't happen.
It's like a fixation.
Yeah.
Fixed upon a single point of contact, and due to that, we're missing the forest for the trees.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I don't really expect to collect Social Security.
Yeah.
But if I spent the next 40 years, being
planning
upset,
all the ways you're going to spend that Social Security money.
right? Or trying to being upset and writing to my congressperson and doing all these things because I want Social Security. Then I don't see the opportunity that is the next 40 years to just make sure that I don't really even need it.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, you're so busy, through the entitled frame of reference, we're so busy finger pointing and blaming that we squandered our ability to actually take meaningful action in the present moment.
Yeah.
And Seneca said this how many years ago? Oh my God.
I don't even know.
I mean, over 2000, right? This is BC times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think expectations just distract us. It's okay. Sometimes we need distraction. Yeah, sometimes it's a healthy thing. It is taxing to be present all the time, to be on all the time. If it's not taxing for you, it's taxing for loved ones, friends.
That is so true. Because
Yeah.
I don't know that it's actually taxing to the individual.
Yeah.
I think that there's like tremendous bliss and equanimity in being present. I think when I think of the tools that I make a concerted effort to stay conscious of on a daily basis, presence is literally at the top of the list. Because to me, presence represents freedom from distraction.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm kind of making the case here that entitlement could just be a form of distraction, whether that is living in hopefulness or fearfulness. I'm a big proponent of hopefulness too, right?
Yeah.
I see fearfulness as a a debilitating distraction. It's simply the wasted energy before finding a solution to solve the problem, whatever's causing you to experience fear in the first place.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you could make a similar case for hopefulness because it's really future oriented. And I think that where hopefulness gets leverage for positive benefit is when we use it as a fuel source for the present moment. You know, we can, and this is what, you know, one of the keystones of leadership is that we're going to articulate a compelling vision of how the future could be if we took action right now. It all happens in the present moment.
Right.
But the leader is simply responsible for creating the illustration, making it raw and compelling, activating some internal emotional response to it, and then leading the concerted effort to follow, which happens in presence. I think an alternative that we could present to living in hopefulness or fearfulness would be living in acceptance, which may be indistinguishable from presence. Really, if you're fully present, then you are simply accepting of what is, and there is no expectation of how it should be. That's just kind of like wasted brain cycles.
Yeah.
You know, at that point.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. You're accepting, you know, what is, and then you're also understanding that, or at least for me, I'm understanding that what I am currently doing is leading to who I will become. And I accept that consequence. I don't know what the implications fully are.
Right.
Yeah.
But you know that you're working towards something.
I'm working inevitably working towards something.
Creating something.
Yeah.
Yeah, always.
It may look completely different, you know, whenever I finally get there, whenever that is. But I'm not entitled to some result. I'm entitled to a result.
Right.
Don't know what that is.
Is that the foundation of presence, like the delineation between presence and entitlement, which is ultimately our topic right now, that presence negates entitlement, because you cannot both be accepting of what is and also have a firm belief that it should be some other way, which is entitlement, really, at the end of the day.
I think, so I agree. And also, one of the most profoundly sad things is when we have entitlements around the intention of others.
Can you explain that a little bit more? I'm tracking, but I just want to make sure.
Yeah, for me to say, this person this person behaved this way.
Mhm.
They intended this,
Oh boy.
right? That is an entitled mindset to presume intention.
Right. Because we can't. That's an expectation, is that we're expecting their intention to be a certain way.
To have aligned with their behavior.
Right, right.
That may not be the case, right? I think,
Oftentimes it's not, you know?
yeah. Acceptance leads to curiosity, though.
Mhm.
If I accept the behavior, right? So
Yeah.
you did this. I accept that. I'm curious to know what you were thinking,
Right.
right?
That's a powerful question.
Yeah.
And it's not perhaps it could be perceived as a confrontational question, but I think if you can be forthright about the spirit in which you're asking that question, it could actually turn into dialogue, right? Which is just inherently valuable. I work with employers, right, that are looking to grow and scale their teams. And one of the things that I find myself talking about day in and day out is entitlement. We actually have a slide in our pitch deck that has a little cutout. It says the cancer of entitlement.
Mm.
And underneath that it says organizations that are kind of contaminated by entitlement, they suffer death by 1,000 cuts. It's pernicious. It happens beneath the level of conscious awareness, but the more I shoulds, or you should, or I
We should,
deserve, or they have to, like those types of statements, they erode the integrity of the organization. I would find it very hard to build a culture of accountability while hiring people who are operating from this entitled frame of reference, which is, ironically, it's delusional.
Yeah.
Is it not?
No, I agree. It is delusional. It adds constraints, that I think prohibit innovation, prohibit growth, and adaptation.
They prohibit responsibility as well.
Responsibility, too.
That's really, entitlement is a blame game. It's a shifting of responsibility, and it doesn't, really matter who it goes on as long as it doesn't go on us, on the subject.
Right.
That's entitlement's game.
I think the very premise of entitlement is you're already relinquishing your control for results.
Right.
Right. So, bring it back to the Social Security example.
Well, are you relinquishing control of the results? I feel like you're trying to control the result by saying this is how it should be. Here's my social proof. It's why entitlement is so easy, is because all we need is a precedent. If one organization does X, Y, or Z, we can then point to that and be like, don't you know that you should be doing? And I'm not saying that this can't happen in a positive fashion and encourage people to do great things. I'm so sorry I cut you off.
Well, what are we submitting control to? If we're submitting control to precedent, it's not actually our ownership of that
Right.
result. We're saying this is something that should repeat itself.
Right.
Right? Independent of my involvement, it should be this way.
Right.
No matter what. That's what we're saying.
Yeah.
So we have relinquished our agency, our control around actually making that thing or the alternative happen without a third party or an environment giving it to us.
I am so curious what the most common instances of entitlement are, like by and large, nationwide, worldwide, just the data on this. I know my experience working with employers that, they're like, well, I should be paid at this level. I deserve this level of pay. And the employers are like, based on what? We're allowing the market to
Based
inform.
on what, right?
Based on what? They want some evidence.
We set the standard.
Yeah. And you can't blame them.
Yeah.
But, it's also like, I feel for the candidates too. They're just trying to assert their worth, their financial worth to that organization, and say, this is what I deserve to be paid. I deserve these benefits. I deserve these privileges. I shouldn't have to do X, Y, and Z types of work. And that, there's a gradient here of, kind of like social acceptability. But I think most of the employers that we work with are kind of like Gen X or Boomer, I would say primarily Gen X, but they're operating from a different point of view, different perspective. And this, I shouldn't have to do this type of work, especially like if it is related to something that is socially perceived as a lower prestige type of activity. For example, taking out the trash, doing the dishes, the office dishes, just kind of like menial, laborious activities that they're very likely to say, this is beneath me. And I think that really agitates Gen X. What do you make of all this?
Yeah, so Gen X, from what I've read, is beholden to the boss. They're loyal to the boss, and they want to make the boss happy. Millennials want purpose. And Gen Z? Gen Z are very materialistic. They definitely like their experiences, right? But so the first part of that, though, could you provide like a summary? I just want to make sure I'm tracking this correctly.
For sure. Yeah, first part of what?
The first part of the statement when you led up to.
Oh, yeah, for sure. We're talking about like compensation, and benefits. Just the meat and potatoes, right, of the employment equation. I deserve X. Here is kind of my potentially limited reasoning as to why, as typically an employee has a more limited scope of experience than an employer. Gotcha. Because an employer, it's if you're an employee, you tend to have one job. If you're an employer, you tend to have many employees, or there's a much greater potential to have many employees.
You tend to employ the employed.
Yes.
Yeah. So, yes, I think it's about precedent.
Right.
It's funny because, like, I was reading today, inflation is up it ticked up to 2.7%.
Uh-oh.
The benchmark is like, what, 2%?
I don't know.
But let's say it went all the way down to 1%, right? Milk is still never going to cost 5 cents a gallon.
Right.
Like it did in 19 whatever.
Yeah, unless we experience negative inflation over a sustained period of time.
Right. But it's
which
probably,
is inherently at odds with our economic model.
Yeah. Exactly. So before they would sell it for 5 cents a gallon, they would let it spoil. Right. So
that's fascinating. Yeah, you're absolutely right. As based on precedent and perhaps pride.
They would let it spoil. More importantly, they would let a lot of people go without it, and they would sell it to the people that could afford to buy it at the price that's set.
Talking about corporations at large.
Right.
Yeah.
So when I think about the precedent around entitlements, it kind of works in a similar fashion. Things get more progressive over time. They get better, more convenient over time. And they're never really going to go back to the same value in our system, in our monetary system. The thing that I think is abused the most is our actual time.
Right.
Like we're giving up a lot more of our time for a lot less in terms of the actual value of the dollar.
Talking about like average worker pay versus perhaps the same thing in 1970.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, and
oh yeah.
Like I think I was talking to my mom, and she was talking about how, and this is maybe oversharing, but she was talking about how her and her older brother had to go up to her dad's workplace, my grandpa's workplace, and get his check because they didn't want him to go drink away all his the mortgage money. And I was like, well, how much was the mortgage? She was like, oh, it was like $15 or something like that. And I was like, damn, that's not a lot of drinking, but it was back then. You know, that's like a beer now, right?
Yeah, in some places.
And you think about that, you know, someone would work, you know, a whole month and, you know, earn, I don't know, $50, $60.
Yeah.
But those $50, $60 went a lot further, right?
It's all relative, though.
Yeah.
Sorry, were you done with that?
No, I was just saying it's all about precedent.
Yeah.
And it is, I think it's relative to the times.
Yeah.
Right?
But it seems to me as though the crux of the issue is how are we spending our time? You know, and this is totally subjective, right? All of us want to spend our time in different ways, and we see different ROIs from different activities and uses of our time. But maybe that's beside the point. Maybe the real point here is that we are engaged in something that we deem to be meaningful and life-giving, productive in some way, shape, or form. And it doesn't matter if by society's norms and understanding if it is productive, because it's a frame of reference, but just that we have some agency. You know, I think in all our study of human behavior, this agency and autonomy factor has really stood out, and it stood the test of time. It is so pervasive and so prevalent. It's so meaningful to us as human beings, and I think that is what we have sacrificed so much of. Yeah. I think that we've had an interesting swing, you know, over the past perhaps decade, you know, and especially with COVID and kind of like the remote work phenomenon, reclaiming a lot of that time that we used to, you know, give to commuting.
Waste.
And waste with precious little attention. You know, maybe we lament about the wasted time in our commute, but for many people, it's just business as usual. It become accepted. It was a precedent. It was a standard and the norm. But I feel hopeful that, or perhaps to reframe this thought, what if entitlement was reconfigured around autonomy and meaningfulness and satisfaction and fulfillment? I think it's just like when, you know, we're working with a candidate and trying to help them choose their next opportunity, and they might have some options there, and they're very likely to prioritize some socially valued, you know, constructs like pay, right? They'll make a decision to go work for an employer that they don't really connect with on such a deep level for a few $1,000s extra a year. Or they'll go do work that they actually do not believe in, like philosophically disagree with, fundamentally, because it provides the quality of life that they aspire to have. And, you know, this is conflated with worth and value and belonging and everything. But what do you think about this idea of kind of reconfiguring and gearing towards autonomy?
I love that idea, and that's something we were talking about earlier where, you know, I'm starting to see a lot more people take part-time gigs or, you know, contract gigs, and because they understand the value is not necessarily having some job for a lifetime. It's getting the most out of their time.
Yeah.
Right? So I think true autonomy is where you optimize that, you know, those 12 working hours or 8 working hours that you have in a day, and you're getting the most bang for your buck. And you're not settling for, you know, what one employer will give you. They say, oh, here's your job description, and then they squeeze the life out of you.
Right.
And get
please go on and toil your life away.
Yeah.
Thank
and
you.
they get 3 job descriptions out of you. Like, hey, can you do this? Can you do that?
Maximization.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And max utilization is where we get the most out of our resources for the most profit.
Right, which is kind of think it could easily be confused with exploitation. And in some cases, I think it is exploitation.
It is.
You said something a second ago that I thought was interesting. You're talking about time maximization, getting the most out of your time. And I was like turning that over in my mind, and I was like, what is another way to say this? It's quality of life.
That is the true quality of life.
Quality
You're
of
talking
life.
about quality of life, how people will take a job that they don't necessarily agree with, but it pays so that it could support their lifestyle.
Yeah.
And ultimately, when you go down that road, most cases, having been there, you realize that it's not a good quality of life because you're commuting or you hate what you do for so long in the day, and you don't necessarily enjoy the people that you're doing it with, and you spend more time with them than you do your loved ones,
Your family.
and your
Yeah.
friends. Yeah. So, so much so that a lot of these environments try to create some family environment, and it's always awkward and weird because it's like, I don't
can't force
care
that.
about, like
Yeah.
I just want to come to work and leave as fast as possible so I can go back to what I actually enjoy, right?
Yeah.
And so I think the key is to finding that autonomy is relinquishing our control around what we believe we deserve as consumers. Like I said, if I've got the $600,000 house, I got to go to work to pay that mortgage.
Oh, yeah.
But if I'm living in a house that costs $250,000, now my options may be a little bit more, available.
You've created some freedom.
Right. So I may be able to say, you know what? I've got some money in the bank. I don't like being around you people. I'm out. Right.
out.
You can
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah.
Or I want to go and I want to take a sabbatical, right? And I want
Yeah.
to go and work on my book or
What
whatever
a
it is.
sexy idea.
Yeah.
Take a sabbatical.
Yeah. So there are actually some places that will, I think it's McKinsey. They offer a month sabbatical.
Wow. Is
You
this
know, and
paid
like,
by chance?
yeah, I think it is. It stretches over, the year.
Yeah.
So you take a little less, but you get that month
Yeah.
sabbatical. I mean, there are plenty of people who it's crazy because people are always saying teachers don't get paid,
Mhm.
but I get a couple months off paid,
Yeah.
right? And for some
Sabbatical.
people, that's worth it, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So I think people are starting to really look at how they're using their time working, and I think mainly because things are becoming unsustainable, right?
Right.
It isn't feasible. I was reading how there's a huge investment by Wall Street to invest and build and buy and convert a lot of homes, single-family properties, into rentals.
Oh, yeah.
Because people that's what they want. They
Yeah.
don't want this big, huge mortgage sitting over them for 15 years. They want the flexibility.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, and they can't afford it anymore.
And they can't afford it, right?
It's not a feasible option anymore.
Yeah. And the use case that they use is a woman that was 41, 42, and she had an infant, and she moved to a new area, and it was unaffordable.
Mm-hmm.
And so, she started to rent, and then they checked in with her, and she was like, I love this. This is great.
Yeah.
I have flexibility. I can,
Fits her needs better.
do different things. So I think needs, right? Do we need some of these things we believe we're entitled to?
Oh, boy.
The American dream, right, is a
Right.
dream. It's still mythology
Mhm.
to some degree.
Yeah.
And if we're framing our entitlements or needs around dreams or myth,
Talk about shifting sand.
yeah,
Yeah.
I just think it's going to basically put us in situations where we have to give up more of our time than what we really are comfortable with.
Speaking of giving up something that we're not comfortable with giving up, but doing it anyways, you were talking earlier about how, say we make the trade-off to pay for our $600,000 home. We're going to take this job that maybe we don't enjoy quite so much,
Mhm.
but it'll kind of provide these lifestyle hygiene factors.
Yeah.
What I think one of the most frightening tragedies that I have come to know and see repeat over time is that whenever you make that trade-off and take a position that does not suit you or your needs, where you're working with people that you don't like, you're not connected to, you don't feel like you belong there, or maybe working in a mission that you don't believe in, you are not the same person that you started as after 5 years' time,
You're not.
after 10 years' time. And I think, like, this is a whole nother category that we're not even considering.
Yeah.
Is if I take this job, who will I become in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, 15 years' time? And just the consideration, I implore our job seekers, our candidates, to think about this. You have a tremendous amount of power right now to shape your future. And this decision is absolutely critical. So, roll the film through your mind and try to ascertain who you will become if you continue down this path. And yeah, it might feel like a totally useless experiment because you can't predict it.
Yeah.
However, there are always signs.
Yeah.
And we can be good stewards of our opportunities by taking inventory of what is truly important to us and how we're looking to model, shape, and grow ourselves, and then explore opportunities or avenues that help us, create that reality,
Right.
as opposed to, one that is going to drag us kicking and screaming away from it into this, future that we never anticipated.
Yeah, just so we can have
Stuff that we feel we are
Entitled to.
convinced
Yeah.
that we're entitled to, that we don't really want or need. What is that quote about, like, buying things you don't want to impress people you don't like, or whatever?
Mhm.
You've heard
Yeah.
this before.
Yeah.
And it's sad but true, and it frightens me, Josiah. It really does.
What is so frightening about it?
Just, I think that the second that we say that could never be me, we are at our most vulnerable to, to succumbing to that.
Yeah.
Because I think and honestly, I probably learned this from you, but
Okay.
a much healthier outlook is that exists within the realm of possibility.
It does.
And we're so quick to judge people, right, for the situations that we see them in. And we have no grounds for making that judgment because we have not lived a single experience of their life. We may have had a similar experience or some similar experiences, but the nuances and the differences between those are infinite.
Yeah. we can witness and observe behavior, but we don't comprehensively understand what it means.
Yeah.
We don't. I can see somebody, getting kicked out of their home, but I don't comprehensively understand what those implications are. They may be being kicked out of 8 homes that they own. It could be paying the mortgage on all the rest of them, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. But I agree, like it is, we're so judgmental. We're very quick to assess and like, ooh, I would never do that, or, ooh, how dare they, or shame, right? And those aren't really productive
Oh, not at all.
mindsets to have, yeah.
It's a total waste.
It is.
It's a waste of our time, and I think it's also it's a slap in the face of just human connection and the overarching oneness of, like, you are a human being, I am a human being, and we are we're travelers, we're passengers on this giant mass spinning on an axis in space.
Yeah. Attempting to just stay on it
Right.
for a very long time. Yeah. This is all an attempt. If it doesn't mean anything else, it could just mean that it's an attempt. And
It's an attempt.
yeah.
Yeah. I think with that's a great note to end on. Josiah, thank you for your insight today.
Thank you.
Thanks for giving me the opportunity to share as well. We hope you guys found some value in it, and we will catch you next time.
See ya.
The Enzo Project is brought to you by Bold Human Capital and Noon Holdings. Edited by ELE. You can find the Enzo Project on Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Music, the song Full Bloom by Jewel and Nuamina. You can find them wherever you listen to your music.